Hello everyone, back at it again in my little yellow kayak. We're doing something different today. We're going to target trout, stock trout at a little pond. I'm adding some crawfish scent to a trout magnet. That trout magnet's called the cotton candy color with a pink 1/32 ounce tungsten head. And it didn't take too long before I was into some fish. I think I dropped this first one. Yeah, I did. But that's okay. There's plenty more trout to catch. These aren't the most elusive of fish. You know, they spent their lives in a cement run at a hatchery. But they can be kind of particular. They can be kind of particular about color sometimes, about presentation, about line size, that kind of stuff. And you can target these stock trout in a variety of ways. Some people like to troll for them. Personally, that's not my favorite. I find it kind of boring. What I like to do is cast at them. And you can pretend they're like little tiny stripers or something rising to bait. Except most of the time these trout are rising to flies. And I'm target casting at them. You know, that's if I have my preference, that's how I want to fish for them. I want to cast at rising fish or fish I see feeding. I try to lead them. Sometimes if you pay close attention, you can determine which way they're going. I'm trying to take a little picture here, and this trout isn't cooperating. But you can determine which way they're tracking, which way they're going, and you can kind of lead them a little bit. So a lot of times you see me casting. I'm casting to rising fish. If I can't tell which way they're going, I'm going to cast right at the rise. And if I can tell which way they're heading, I'll try to lead them by 3, 4, 5 feet, something like that. So accuracy matters. It's not just like, throwing power bait off of the bank somewhere. I do that too if this kind of method isn't working or the conditions are really nasty. You can fish bottom rigs for trout in almost any kind of horrible weather, and they'll work pretty well. But if it's relatively nice like this, I'd much rather fish for them with a rod and reel and cast at them than fishing bait on the bottom or trolling or something like that. Also, conditions like this where there's barely a ripple on the water, there's I would call it mostly sunny skies. These are tough conditions for bass fishing. Oh yeah, by the way, I picked up a few other species along the way. I got a whole bunch of yellow perch. I'm not going to show you all of them because they were kind of that size, bait size perch. As I was saying, these conditions are tough for bass fishing, so that's another reason I'm trout fishing. Also, we're getting into the spawn right now. I didn't realize it at the time I was fishing here, but a lot of the bass where I was fishing were already spawning. And when that's going on, I try to leave them alone, let them do their thing. So while the bass are spawning, I can target these stock trout and have a good time, and the bass can go make more bass. What's that one? I got a mix of rainbow trout, brown trout, and brookies on this trip. There he is. Nice little rainbow trout. I think that was a rainbow anyway. I didn't get a great look at him. For different soft plastics, I have different retrieves, and with the trout magnet, I've kind of settled on this kind of hopping retrieve. I mix it up until I get something to go for it and eat it. You notice I missed that first swing at it, and the reason for that is that this is another wrong species. That was, I think it was a bluegill, maybe a pumpkin seed. Quick release. That's all right. There's plenty of fish in this little pond. Most of the time lately, it's either been raining sideways or blowing 10 to 20 plus. And so this was one of those rare afternoon evenings where it was mostly calm and it wasn't blowing too bad. Oh, I dropped another one. I did drop a lot of fish on this trip, and that's kind of unusual. I mean, my rod is kind of soft, and usually I shouldn't drop this many fish. The trout magnet hook is smaller than I'm used to, and maybe that was part of the problem. They also weren't super aggressive. Sometimes you can just smoke them. I mean, one after another. And a few days later, I had a trip like that. I'll show you that in a different video. But they were being kind of hesitant. And I don't know if they had such good visibility. The water's got a little bit of color to it, a little bit of stain. This one was a nice fish. And I think I lost this one too. I had him on for, I don't know, 30 seconds or so. And all I saw when I lost him was a flash of gold. And I'm pretty sure it was a bigger brown. Now in these ponds, especially these smaller ones, it seems like there's a smaller average size of trout. But the trout they put in are, plentiful. There's plenty of trout in here. And sort of to make up for some of the small fish, they put in a handful of big ones. And if you get a big one on this light gear, he's pulling the kayak around. And whenever they're doing that, whenever they're pulling the kayak around, oh, I just lost them there. Whenever they're pulling the kayak around, that usually means I've got a better than average fish on. So I was just bouncing around this little pond and trying to find areas with rising fish. I know it's kind of hard to see on camera. They weren't rising like crazy. Sometimes, you'll be fishing a trout pond and it looks like half the pond is alive with fish rising to bugs and flies and other kind of stuff. It wasn't like that. It was more sporadic. And I was focused mostly on fishing the shoreline, and that's just because I was having the best success there. There was some more rainbows out in the middle, and a few of those could have been holdover rainbows, and I just found them harder to fool than the fish along shore. Now the fish along shore, there could be a few rainbows mixed in, but it was mostly browns and brookies. And so that's what I'm catching, and it's literally because I thought it was easier, and I was having better success doing it. So that's what I kind of stuck with, and that seemed true. I fished a bunch of ponds. I'll show you those videos a little bit later on in the next few days or weeks. What's that? That's a nice brookie. There he is. Yeah, so once I figured out that the fish in the middle, right in the middle, were a little bit harder to catch, I just switched gears and stuck with the shoreline. And I kind of like that a little bit better. The fish are easier to target. Once they go for a fly in 30 feet of water, they could drop down 10 feet fast. And if I'm fishing the upper layer of the water column, those fish may or may not come back up. Versus if I'm casting at a trout in 3 feet of water, there's only so many places he can be. And it's easier to get their attention. There's one that just rose in the middle of the lake. You see that dimple out there? They were doing that all evening. What's this? That was a little rainbow there. Alright, it's the next morning. Completely different pond. Temperatures dropped by at least 10 degrees overnight. I'm all bundled up. I got my fleece gloves on. Those are a lifesaver, by the way. But I was still having trouble keeping these fish pinned. And eventually I switched to some bigger lures with bigger hooks. I think I ended up dropping this first fish here. But it's the same kind of retrieve as I was using at the other pond. It's kind of this hopping retrieve that I do. And that fish was on a Berkeley Power Nymph with a 1/13 ounce Cocho tungsten jig head. Oh, I almost had him. Oh, a little slower than that maybe. But for whatever reason, I was having trouble keeping him pinned to get him in the boat. I'm going to let him go anyway, so it's not a big deal. If I lose him, I get to see him, I get to have the fight, and just a quick release. But I don't know. I was thinking about why I kept losing him for a while. Some of it's just, luck of the draw, random chance, because the rainbows only have, or the brookies or browns or whatever, they only have, a single hook in them. And I might not get that hook into a lot of meat. Their outside of the mouth is kind of soft. and they do this crazy twisting, twirling dance, and they can easily throw a hook. So that's part of it, but I did feel like I was dropping more than I normally do. There he is. That's a nice brown. Yep, got him on the Berkeley Power Nymph. This morning trip was just a little bit slower than I expected. I tried a couple different lures, and I ended up fishing with a Ned rig. And this is normally a bait that's used for bass. And the way I was fishing it is cast it out, let it hit bottom, and then pick it up and either swim it or use a shaking retrieve while swimming it. I know it sounds a little unusual, but it works. Not quite sure why it works, but it works. It gives the fish a little bit bigger target. I tend to catch a little bit bigger size trout doing this with the Ned rigs instead of the tiny plastics. But a lot of times in conditions like this, they just won't go for it. There he is. There's a nice rainbow. I do tend to do better when there's some wind, when there's some chop on the water, when there's some clouds. But I tried a whole bunch of other plastics, and I came to this Ned rig, and they seemed like they're eating it okay, so I just kind of rolled with it. It started out pretty calm in the morning. I've got some real clear water here. And the other thing I should say about the Ned rig is that I'm typically fishing it on a 10-pound gold label Seaguar fluoro. So it's not a super light line technique. On this one, I can tell by the rod that I went back to the Berkeley Power Nymph to pick off this fish. So I was bouncing around between presentations. If I threw a Ned rig at a few fish and they didn't eat it, I'd switch to the Berkeley Power Nymph. That kind of thing. I can cast that Power Nymph further than I can the little tiny trout magnets with the 1/32 ounce jig head and the tiny hook. Let's see what this one is. Looks like a brown. It is a brown. You can tell he's a stock fish. His fins kind of rubbed off in the hatchery. Got the Power Nymph going again. I tend to, find a bait that's working and then stick with it for a while until it stops working. Rotate through a few other rods. I usually bring a couple rods with me, and I just put them behind me in that hatch. So typically I'll bring like 2 or 3 rods trout fishing. And if I have a good idea of the conditions, I might only bring 2. I just lay them down behind me and then rotate through them. To me, these Berkeley Power Nymphs, they look more like a crawfish than anything else. I'm not really sure what the trout think they are. That maybe they think it's a dragonfly nymph or something else. But to me, they look like a crawfish. So I'm kind of hopping it along the bottom, hoping a trout goes and picks it up. And this one did. I'm not fishing in very deep water. It was a little hard to see on that first pond, but on the second pond, the water's clear and you can see a little bit better. I'm trying to fish the color line. So whatever fish you're fishing for, if they're trout or bass or whatever, stripers, a lot of times they'll be on some kind of an edge. And you can sort of see it over my shoulder there, but there's a line in the shallows of very shallow water. And then it starts sliding into deeper water, it gets a little darker. And there's a nice brown. He almost looks like he has a leopard print on him. So as you transition into that deeper water where you can't see the bottom, that's what's called the color line. And that's where I try to keep the kayak, and seemed like some of the trout like that edge there. Alright, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. Just like all my other videos, I'll put all the gear in the video description so you can duplicate what I was doing out here at these 2 ponds. Hopefully have some good success trout fishing wherever you might live around the country or around the world. I'll I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.